There are some Pokemon species in the world that are so shy, so mysterious, so divorced from the human civilizations that have sprung up around the world that they end up getting shrouded in layer upon layer of myth. Most of the ghost Pokemon are like this, having many myths about them that they're composed of the spirits of those that have died in certain specific ways. And the subject of this current guide, the Clefairy line, are no different, having been shrouded in ages of myth and legend due to their extensive isolation from the human world. Well, today we're going to take this mysterious species and unravel how to raise and care for them, while dispelling some of the more outrageous and false ideas about them. Hello, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would acquire, raise, and interact with different kinds of Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be going over one of the more mysterious species that lives in the Kanto region, the Clefairy line. The Pokemon that are in this line are very shy and reclusive creatures, often preferring to remain high up in their mountain homes where it's hard for people to get to them. This has led to very few people even catching one of these Pokemon, and why for so long they were incorrectly classified as a normal type Pokemon before the fairy typing was discovered. But with the better advances in technology and the work of a few dedicated breeders, we're starting to really get a handle on how to care for these Pokemon and what they need in order for them to be well taken care of. The first form of the Clefairy line is Cleffa, which is actually our second baby Pokemon of the series, after Pichu. I go into more detailed description of what makes a baby Pokemon in that guide if you're interested. But in essence, a baby Pokemon is a stage in the evolutionary process that, for whatever reason, has underdeveloped capabilities compared to other Pokemon of the same age. Like how a Spheal and a Cleffa, when hatched at the same time, the Spheal will be much more able to care and handle itself than the Cleffa would. This can lead to issues, such as how Pichu shocks itself when it uses its electrical power, or it can simply lead to an inability to defend itself, like Cleffa and Igglybuff. Cleffa itself is a small bipedal Pokemon with a pink star-shaped body. It has two small black eyes and large brown ears that sit on top of its head, pointing out like 2 points of the star. Behind it is a small curled tail, and it has a small curl of hair on its forehead. Once they form a strong bond with something, whether that be a trainer or the rest of their Clefairy family, they evolve into a Clefairy. Very similar in shape to Cleffa, really the only big difference between a Clefairy and a Cleffa is that Clefairy is double Cleffa's size, going from 1 foot tall to 2 feet tall, and from weighing 7 pounds to 16 pounds. Their ears also get a bit bigger, now only having the brown bits at the ends instead of across the whole ear. They also develop small nails or claws on their limbs, and oddly have 2 pink patches that look almost like a blush. Clefairy, just like the Nidoran in the last guide, evolves into their final stage through the use of a moonstone, resulting in a Clefable. Once again, Clefable is double the size from the Clefairy, standing just over 4 feet tall. But it gets way heavier, now weighing 88 pounds. A large bump, but for a fully evolved Pokemon from a 3-form line, that's not terribly large. Clefable keeps the same basic shape as its previous evolutions, with the pink star-shaped body. Its ears get longer once again, and its tail and wings get much larger as well. In all, these Pokemon really don't change too much from evolution, just changing in small details. It's a very simple Pokemon line. And for those of you that are wondering, yes, there are old legends that these Pokemon are actually from space, like Deoxys or Minior, but there really hasn't been any proof of that, and much of it probably comes from how rare these Pokemon are, with them living up in their mountainous homes and being very shy. After all, people often don't understand the things that they're unfamiliar with, and thus make up stories to explain them. But we can get into that later on in the care guide. For now, let's get into the care guide and figure out if these elusive fairy-type Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. Unfortunately, finding out details of how to care for these Pokemon is a difficult process. They're not common Pokemon for people to have, and are very difficult to observe in the wild, leading to a shortage in details of these Pokemon's care. After all, for the longest time, we had mistyped these Pokemon as normal types, when they're in fact fairy types. So, needless to say that the care for these Pokemon has quite a few holes in it. But that's not to say we don't know anything. We do know that these Pokemon live in mountainous areas usually, places like Mount Moon, Mount Cornet, and Mount Hokulani. Forgive me if I mispronounced that, people from the Alola region. I'm very sorry if I did. The thing is, they don't live in mountainous regions because that's the best habitat for them, like the Charmander line does. They actually live there because they are a very shy species, and prefer places where the human population can't reach them easily. They honestly could live in almost any environment so long as they have a few necessary details. One is that they need a secluded area that won't get much foot traffic from people and other Pokemon. When I say that these Pokemon are shy, then I really mean that they are shy, to the point that other people will probably not believe you right away that you have a Clefairy line Pokemon. Putting them in a place where they will constantly be coming into contact with people and other Pokemon will do nothing but stress your Pokemon out and make it start looking for new places to live. So instead, you'll want to set up their enclosure somewhere away from their home, as far away as you can get on your own property. Unfortunately, that does mean that the only people that can really get and care for these Pokemon are those that have the space for them. City life is out of the question for these Pokemon, and even the suburbs is still too cramped. If you're going to follow this guide to care for your Clefairy line evolution, then you'll need to live somewhere out in the country, where you have plenty of land to put their enclosures on. And even then, I would plant quite a few trees around the enclosure area, which will act as a natural barrier, blocking the sight of other Pokemon and people as they move around your property. As for the enclosure itself, this is where things tend to get a bit sticky. We aren't entirely sure how they live in the wild. I mean, yeah, we know they live in the mountains, but we aren't sure if they make nests in caves, or if they live in trees, or if they construct their nests out of material they find in the wild. So the enclosure that I'm going to give you is one that research says should be good for your Clefairy, but always keep in mind that it's still experimental, and your Pokemon could have a negative reaction to it. The chances of that are low. As I said, these have been tried and tested before. But with Pokemon that are as mysterious as these, things can happen. So always keep an eye on your Pokemon, looking for any signs that they're becoming stressed or unhappy in their living situation. The first thing that we're going to be covering is the housing. From the research that I've found, the enclosures for these Pokemon aren't too different from your average small child's room. Of course, I'm going to recommend getting a shed to act as their home. They just function so well as that. And the size of it will depend on the evolution that you have. For Cleffa and Clefairy, the requirement is nearly the same, a shed that is 10 feet by 10 feet at minimum. You could go a bit bigger if you wanted to, but you will need at least something of that size to accommodate these Pokemon. If you intend on getting a Moonstone and evolving your Clefairy into a Clefable, then you'll need to get a shed that's a bit bigger in scale, increasing to 15 feet by 10 feet. I know it doesn't seem like that big of an increase, but the Clefairy line is one of the few rare evolutions that doesn't get a massive increase in size when it comes to the final evolution, so it doesn't need that much more room than its previous forms. If you plan on getting a Clefable from the beginning, I would recommend doing that right away. That way you aren't paying for the upgrade when the time comes. As for decorations, again, that's pretty much a mystery. They'll definitely need a Pokemon bed that's rated for their size, and basic stuff like a food dish and water dish. Since this is really our first human-ish Pokemon, meaning that they have 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, plenty of people can feel kinda weird about just putting the dishes on the floor, or even using dishes in general, which I get. I get weird doing that with my Leavanny. A good solution to this is getting them a small table, like a side table that you would have in your living room, and then placing the food and water on that. It would prevent your Pokemon from having to stoop down awkwardly to get a drink of water and eat, and it removes the weirdness factor from the interaction. But besides those few items, the decoration is really up to you. There has been some evidence shown that they like soft, plushy things, but I'm not sure if that's the species themselves that really does like that, or if it's just the natural inclination of people that go, oh, it's a fairy type, it must like all the girly pink fuzzy things. So decorate their enclosure how you see fit, but keep an eye on them in case they don't seem to like something that you put in. The next major part of this Pokemon's enclosure is going to be a bit weird, as we haven't had a necessity for a Pokemon this esoteric before. Somewhere near your Pokemon's home, you'll have to have a clearing for them where they have an unobstructed view of the night sky, especially where they'll be able to see the full moon when it's out. It's not entirely clear why they need this, but it has been shown to negatively affect their mental development if they don't have it. This is because on nights with a full moon, these Pokemon are famous for appearing in clearings or along the edges of lakes and dancing in the moonlight. This is actually when the majority of people see them in the wild, and it's most likely the basis for the rumor that these Pokemon are from space. And so, getting back on topic, you'll need to have a clearing near this Pokemon's home that it can go out to and dance in the moonlight. But that clearing also needs to be kind of secluded, because if it notices any people around, then it'll run back to its home. Like I said, these Pokemon are very shy, which is why a big part of caring for them is going to be getting them to trust you. Actually, thinking back on the lake that I mentioned earlier, that wouldn't be a bad idea if you could swing it. Have a lake that is maybe 30 feet in diameter and 6 feet at its deepest. It would provide an excellent place for them to do their moon dances, giving them a good source of water as long as you make sure that the water stays clean, and you can stock it with some simple water-type Pokemon as well. Heck, a few Clefable sightings even say that they like to use their wings to bounce and dance on the surface of the water, so it might really be a good idea to install a lake if you can. But that was just an idea that I had based on the information I found. Plenty of the sightings of these Pokemon and a few of the experimental enclosures I found just have the open area being a grassy field. It will honestly be up to your personal preference and what kind of space you have available. As for the Pokemon that you can house with the Clefairy line, one obvious answer is more Clefairy line. These Pokemon are often sighted in groups or packs or whatever a group of fairy-type Pokemon are called. A flutter, maybe? Well, these Pokemon clearly live together in the wild, and gather together under the full moon to perform their dances with each other. So they are very social creatures with each other. And as I mentioned earlier, simple and calm water-type Pokemon like Magikarp and Feebas are great choices to put in the pond if you do end up going that route. Really, what you want to house with them are calm and solitary Pokemon. Things that won't bother them and leave them to their own devices. You should avoid most poison and fire types, as they often have negative effects on their surrounding environment, and those effects have bigger detrimental effects on fairy types. Dragon and dark types are bad ideas, but for the opposite reason. A lot of dragon and dark types are very territorial and antagonistic toward other Pokemon, and if they end up picking a fight with any of your Clefairy line, then it won't end well for them. Grass types might be a good fit to house with these Pokemon, depending on the species, of course. They might help the health of the secluded woody area that you've made for your Pokemon, and many of them are very laid back and relaxed, so they shouldn't stress out your Clefairy line Pokemon overly much. Availability. Given the fact that these Pokemon are so shrouded in myth and legend, I'm sure that you can guess that they aren't the most available Pokemon on the market. I mean, sure, they have been confirmed to have a stable population in all but the Hoenn and Paldea regions, but that isn't really the issue. They live in such isolated places, up on steep mountains, that just getting to their territory can be dangerous and a journey in and of itself. But the real obstacle to catching one of these Pokemon is the fact that they are so good at avoiding contact with humans. Realistically, even if you find yourself in Clefairy territory, you still won't find one. You could spend weeks up in the mountain with known Clefairy and Clefable sightings and not hear so much as a call from one of them. The only exception to this is during their moonlit dances. If you can find a spot where they do this and stake it out on a moonlit night, then you could get your chance to catch one of these Pokemon. But doing so should only be attempted by accomplished mountain climbers and Pokemon trainers, as it could lead to you spending weeks up in the mountains just waiting for the chance to see a Clefairy. And keep in mind, that is just for Clefairy. Both Cleffa and Clefable are much more rare than their middle evolution, and as such, getting hold of a wild one of those will be even tougher. Unfortunately, these Pokemon aren't any easier to get a hold of in the breeding industry either. Due to the difficulty in just acquiring one of these Pokemon, getting enough to sustain a breeding population large enough to start selling them is almost unheard of. Couple that with the fact that the innate shyness of these Pokemon needs to be overcome just to care for them, and the care that we do have for them is very experimental, and you have a recipe for a Pokemon species that not many breeders are willing to cut their teeth on. I believe there is one breeder who manages a full Clefairy farm in the Kanto region, and possibly one in the Johto region as well, I think near Goldenrod City. And since there aren't many people in the business that can provide these Pokemon, you can bet that those two breeders have waiting lists that are years long, and they don't get sold cheap. You'll be sinking a lot of money into acquiring a bred and raised Clefairy evolution. And of course, the price will fluctuate with what evolution stage you're trying to buy. They won't sell you a Cleffa, since they are baby Pokemon and should be staying with the Flutter until they evolve. But these breeders that I mentioned both offer Clefable as well as Clefairy. It'll just be another increase in price on top of the already high price for the Pokemon itself. But for that money, you get a Pokemon that's already used to humans, is very well trained, and you won't have to make the dangerous hike and camping trip up a mountain to try and catch a wild one that isn't used to humans, and might try to run the first chance it gets. In my opinion, a breeder-bought Pokemon is better, and well worth the money. Care. In comparison to actually getting a hold of one of these Pokemon, caring for one is a lot easier. The biggest part of caring for one of them is going to be working through their innate shyness, and getting them more acclimated to having humans around them. A good way to circumvent that obstacle is to get a breeder-raised one. Then the Pokemon will have been born and raised around people, getting used to their presence. I mean, yes, it might still take some time for it to get used to you specifically, but at that point, you'll already be leagues ahead of someone that had caught a wild one. But for those of you who managed to actually get a hold of a wild-caught member of the Clefairy line, first of all, congratulations on finding that. Second, you have a very long and hard road ahead of you in just gaining this Pokemon's trust. And there are a few main ways that you're going to be doing that. The first is going to be by following a routine. Feed them at the same times every day, come into their enclosure at the same time, and stay for the same amount of time, things like that. By doing this, you'll begin to set the foundation for a comfortable and safe environment for your Pokemon. If they know your usual pattern and what to expect out of their day, they'll start to relax in their enclosure, even if they are still very shy and reclusive when you're around. Nobody likes a life that's too chaotic. The next thing to keep in mind is to make yourself seem softer. So when you approach the Pokemon enclosure, move in slow, deliberate movements, as quick or erratic ones might scare your Pokemon before you can even see it. If you do see it, then speak to it in a soft, reassuring tone, like you're talking to a scared child. Reassure it that it's okay, you aren't there to hurt it, and that you would like to be its friend. Even if the Clefairy line can't understand your words, the soft and comforting tones of your voice should still carry your message across, or at least not scare it anymore. Try getting closer to it to see if it will allow you to come closer. If it runs off, which is the most likely outcome in the beginning, then don't get upset or scold it. Moving away from you is perfectly okay, and if it happens, then don't chase it down. Stop, turn your back, and leave. This shows that you don't mean to harm it and were simply curious. Another thing to do is to try and play with it. I know that seems kind of counterproductive, with it running from you whenever you try and get near it, but when you come to feed it, which we will get into, bring along a few toys with you. Things like balls, rubber toys, things that sparkle and jingle. Those are the kind of toys that'll get their attention the most. So when you arrive at their enclosure, try to use them to draw the Pokemon out and get it to interact with you. Once you get it to understand that you're not a threat to it or its territory, then you should see it start to take an interest in the toys. Remember, soft movements and tone of voice are going to be how you get them to start trusting you. So don't do stuff like throw the toys or shout to get their attention. Let the Pokemon come to you and decide that it trusts you enough to play with you on its own. The last thing that could get your Clefairy line Pokemon to start trusting you is food, which you'll be doing anyway. The act of you bringing the Pokemon food to eat will naturally, over time, cause the Pokemon to start warming up to you, as generally in the wild, only those of a Pokemon's pack or family would share its food with them. So by doing this, you will essentially become part of the Pokemon's family. As for what to feed them, these Pokemon are vegetarians, so it's going to be another berry diet. Now what they actually eat is still a matter of debate, but there are a few diets that have been theorized and put into practice by the breeders that I mentioned before. These mostly include berries that grow in mountainous regions, such as the apricot, the waper, or the cherry berries. The amount will, of course, differ based on what stage your Pokemon is in. Cleffa will take the least amount of food, being a baby Pokemon. I would like to reiterate my point from the Pikachu Care Guide that you should not be caring for a baby Pokemon unless properly trained, as they are very immature and need special care requirements. Removing them from their family of Clefairy and Clefable in the wild could have lasting damage at the Pokemon's psyche, and should never be done except in a few outlying circumstances. And no self-respecting breeder should ever sell a baby Pokemon to you, instead keeping the Pokemon with the family so that it can grow up correctly. But if you happen to find yourself in the position of having to care for a Cleffa, then you will be giving it 1 cup of food a day, spread out between 3 different meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That may seem like a lot, but due to this Pokemon's status as a baby Pokemon, it's growing and developing at a rate faster than non-baby Pokemon, so it'll need more food than those Pokemon. Also, remember to slice any of the bigger berries for these Pokemon into smaller chunks. It just makes it easier for them to eat, as both the apricot and waper berries can have skin that's too thick for them to get through. Luckily, this amount of food does go down somewhat when it evolves into a Clefairy. As a Clefairy, it doesn't need as much food to grow and develop, so we're going to cut out the lunch meal. Instead, the breakfast and lunch meals are going to be increased in volume. Now you'll be giving them 1.5 cups of food with every feeding. You also won't have to slice the berries anymore, as Clefairy will be able to get through the skin of the berries with ease now. And for those of you that are planning on going further up the evolutionary line, the only thing you'll have to worry about with a Clefable is upping the food that you give your Pokemon in the 2 meals, now giving them 3.5 cups of food at breakfast and dinner. All in all, not bad for a fully evolved Pokemon. And remember, you will be using this to bond with your Pokemon. So while giving your Pokemon food may seem like a simple part of the process, it really could go a long way with these ones. And then, really, the only last part of the care section for this guide is going to be enclosure maintenance. Stuff like trimming the grass, making sure that the trees don't grow out of control, keeping the pond clean if you do happen to use that, stuff like that. Just keep in mind that using machinery like a chainsaw or a lawnmower will absolutely startle and scare off your Pokemon from being around you, unless they're used to the noise already. Even then, if they are used to it, they may still not like it, as fairy types tend not to like machinery and especially gas-powered ones. It's the weaknesses to metal and poison types. So you may have to do things like use shears and a non-mechanical lawnmower to mow the grass. Cost. This Pokemon is going to be expensive to get a hold of. To be honest, the cheaper option will probably be to try and catch it in the wild, as getting all the equipment you'll need to survive in the mountains for a while will almost certainly cost less than getting a Pokemon from a breeder. Everything you'll need, like a tent, spare clothes, a backpack, good boots, will probably set you into the high category, maybe the very high category depending on what brand you decide to get. But like I said earlier, surviving in the mountains can be dangerous unless you're trained for it, and I would not recommend trying it anyway. It is by no means a guarantee that you'll even find one of these Pokemon while you're up there. So, while yeah, it's more expensive, getting one from a breeder will be better and faster in the long run, unless you are extremely lucky. Clefairy and Clefable both will be well within the very high category though, thanks to them being so rare. Clefable will cost a little more than its pre-evolution, but at those prices the difference can tend not to matter. Cleffa I can't put a price on. Any breeder that has them shouldn't be selling them, so the price doesn't matter. The enclosure price will depend on where you live and if you have some of the elements of it already. Do you already live out in the countryside where things are already kind of isolated? Cool, the price just went down. Do you have a large wooded yard with a secluded corner all set up already? There's another price drop. So really, this price can be anywhere between moderate, where you just need to get a few things for the Pokemon's enclosure to get things ready, to very high, where you live in a packed neighborhood and need to move out to the country somewhere. It really is just that big of a mixed bag. Food is the one place that you're going to get a bit of a break in the wallet. Thankfully, these Pokemon are herbivores. Those diets tend to be a lot less expensive than carnivorous diets. The berries for these Pokemon's diet shouldn't be too expensive, especially if you can buy their food in bulk and keep it frozen. Cleffa and Clefairy's foods will be at different ends of the moderate category, and Clefable will bump you up into the high category, but just over that line. Conclusion. I'm just going to say it, I don't think the Clefairy line make good household pets. Sure, they're cute, and if you can bond with them, they can apparently be very friendly. But there are just so many roadblocks to getting to that point. Getting one is very prohibitive, whether it be the price of buying one from a breeder or just trying to find one in the wild. Then once you have one, it pretty much needs to live separate from you completely, and they are so shy that it's going to take a lot of time and effort into gaining their trust. It's just a lot to handle, especially if this turns out to be your first Pokemon. But for those that are willing to put in the effort and the money, these Pokemon can be good Pokemon to have, and it might just end up being the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we cover the Fire Fox Pokemon, Vulpix, and its evolution Ninetales. Have a wonderful night, everyone.